Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again, and it's a pleasure to have you back on the afternoon of the first of 3 days of FIU's 2022 Women in Politics and Policy virtual flying seminar. It's my absolute pleasure and honor to be opening our session with the leader of the Victory Fund and Victory Institute. And to get it going, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Skylar Gold.
Thank you so much, Eric. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Mayor Parker. So we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to first start with reading Mayor Parker's bio, giving a brief introduction. I'll ask a few questions of my own just to get the discussion going, and then I'll open it up to my peers. So I guess just a brief introduction on my part. My name is Skylar Gold. I'm a political science and public administration major at FIU. I'm a senior, and I should be graduating this spring in my last semester. So I'm very excited about that. But we'll go ahead and jump right into it. So Mayor Parker. Mayor Annise Parker is the president and CEO of the Victory Fund and Victory Institute, and the first former elected official to lead the organizations, having served 6 years as Houston City Council member, 6 years as city controller, and 6 years as, of course, mayor of Houston. She is one of only 2 women to have been elected mayor of Houston and was the first openly LGBTQ mayor of any major American city. Currently, she serves on the Policy and Global Affairs Committee of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and on the boards of Houston Botanic Garden, Houston BRC Foundation, Patient Care Intervention Council, and the Climate Disclosure Project. She is the recipient of various awards and recognitions, has served on numerous committees, boards, and task forces, and has been a lifelong advocate, a lifelong LGBTQ advocate, having served in some capacity with dozens of organizations. Highlights include as the president of the Houston Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus, as co-chairs of the Lesbian Gay Rights Lobby of Texas, and the Lesbian and Gay Democrats of Texas, and as treasurer of the Names Project of Houston. So I will go ahead and actually link, because that was paraphrasing. It's a very long bio. It's very extensive. And I'll just go ahead and link the full in the chat for anybody who wants to peruse over that.
Skylar, you did a great job of paraphrasing that, because some people insist on reading the whole damn thing. So this is good.
We only have an hour with you. I don't want to take too much. But we'll just go ahead and jump right into questions. So my first question for you, Mayor Parker, is how do you feel that your identity as not only a woman in politics, but as an openly gay woman in politics has affected the way in which you've navigated your career so far? And what advice can you give to women who come from other intersectional groups?
So first, the biggest impact is being a woman. No question. I mean, being a lesbian, I have to say, I think I'm saying this, is obviously not a choice, but I have a choice in how I present myself and how I choose to navigate the world. And so clearly that leading with being a woman, and I get asked this question a lot, is what's had more impact, being a not lesbian, being a woman, no question. But more importantly, unlike a lot of my peers in office, I was a lesbian activist for decades before I was elected to office. And so my public persona was formed around being a lesbian activist. A lot of the LGBT people who hold office today are people who made their careers in other areas and also are gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. I was arguably the most visible lesbian activist in Houston in the early to mid 80s. And so it was part of the public persona I had. And I actually had to work hard to establish my identity a little bit as something other than lesbian activist. Because what I discovered when I ran for office was that, well, I've been elected in Houston. We had 2-year terms in Houston. So if you're a politician in Houston, you were facing the voters over and over again every other year. And so in those, we had term limits. So 3 terms council member, term limited, 3 terms controller, term limited, 3 terms mayor, term limited. So clearly I was successful at the different positions, term limited out and moved up. That's 9 elections, but I have actually been on the ballot 11 times. The first 2 elections I lost. And part of the reason was that the first time I ran was 1991. I don't know if there's anybody on this call who's alive, was alive in 1991, but just in case, 1991. And every time I saw my name in print, it was Annise Parker lesbian. Oh, well, no, it was Annise Parker gay. They didn't use the L word very much in media in the 90s. So it was Annise Parker gay activist. And so that was how I was defined in the eyes of the voters. The second time I ran was in 1995 in a special election. And without going too long into the story, it was a January special election. It was a 6-week campaign. And what I discovered that no one's paying any attention to completely off-cycle special elections. They're very under the radar, and an election in January that starts in December, there were 19 candidates running for an at-large city council seat. There was not a single candidate forum I went to in those 6 weeks. There were more people in the audience than there were candidates. I mean, there just no one was paying any attention. And I finished 3rd out of the 19 candidates, behind 2 people who had already been elected countywide to other positions. So, and again, every time I saw my name in print, it was an Annise Parker gay activist. And I realized that if I was going to do this again, that I had to figure out a way to not be Annise Parker gay without hiding or denying who I was, because there's obviously no way I can go back into the closet. And at this point, I became a lesbian activist in college in the 1970s. I went into the oil industry. So I had a 20-year career in the oil industry before I was elected to city council. So when I ran and won in 97, part of the way I was able to, and this is, we'll go to the last part of your question about intersectionality and how you deal with it. I actually made a portfolio of the media coverage. There were 2 daily papers in Houston at the time, and 3 TV stations. I gotta date myself, but I made a portfolio of the coverage, and I made an appointment with each of the editorial boards of the 2 newspapers and the 3 TV stations. And I showed them the coverage, and I said, "Isn't this interesting? I work for Republican oil man Robert Mossbacher. I do financial modeling for his firm. And yet every time you refer to me, you say I'm a gay activist. Look at how you refer to my opponents. My opponents are, businessman this, law firm employee that, but I'm a gay activist. I haven't been a leader of an LGBT organization at this point in a decade. But yeah, I'm certainly a lesbian, but how is this fair?" And I just laid out the evidence. And what happened when I ran in 97 was that the coverage changed. Now, partly I think the world was changing too, and people were getting it a little bit better, but also without me going in and advocating and pushing, I don't know that it would have changed, because it was a handy hook for the media to describe me. The other thing I did in that 97 race was that every piece of literature, and I have the complete portfolio of my campaign literature, every piece of literature, I put past president, Houston Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus on it. So that the gay and lesbian words were coming from me on my literature, and I got to own them. But it also meant that, if my opponent's like, "Well, don't you know she's a lesbian?" And it's like, "Yeah, hello, she says right here that, the G and L words were there." So I both de-gayed myself, if I can use that phrase, in one way, but cemented my identity in another. And I think that's important. What I do now at Victory is a 30-year-old organization. Doesn't everybody have a step and repeat in their home for doing Zoom calls? Victory Fund and Victory Institute, we're one organization, LGBT Victory, but they should, yes. Victory Institute is a C3, Victory Fund is a PAC, And so we're one organization with two halves, but our sole mission is to help LGBT leaders achieve public office. Victory Fund endorses candidates who are running for office. Victory Institute trains candidates, works on appointments. We have an internship program. We do a whole range of services, and you can find us victoryfund.org, victoryinstitute.org. But much of what we do on the Institute side is to teach people how to run for office. And the critical element of that is no one really cares that you're gay or lesbian or trans, or no one really cares. Did you smoke pot? Did you have a stupid indiscretion when you were in college? What they care is that you understand their lives and that you have some plan to address the critical issues that they think are important for them. I hear from people all the time, oh, I want to run for office. No one cares that you want to run for office. People care that you're going to do something to influence their lives for the better. And so, looping all this kind of rambling response to your question back together, what it means to be intersectional is intersectional, I believe, is that you have to own who you are. Voters respond to that. You have to understand how your varied life experiences influence your policy decisions, the issues that you want to work on, but also how you can use them to relate to the people that you're asking for support from. And then finally, you have to be able to weave your narrative into a message to the voters that they can respond to. People want integrity in public officials. People want authenticity. People want honesty in a truly perverse way. And I don't have anything nice to say about Donald Trump. And this is not intended as a nice thing to say, but as a direct thing to say. Part of the reason that 30% of America still supports Donald Trump is that they think he has integrity and honesty and that he's the real deal because he says outrageous things. Now, when you think about that, there's a message in that for other politicians too, and that is that people want to believe the folks who are standing in front of them asking for support. And what we tell our LGBT candidates, and what I've experienced myself in 11 races, is that whether or not people have a good opinion or a bad opinion of someone who's LGBT, what I have found is that there's some kind of alchemy that happens where they say, if you're going to be honest with me about something that I don't approve of, I bet you will be honest with me about things that I care more about. And I think that's something that I think works for all candidates. And I think it's an important aspect of intersectionality. To close, Victory helped elect Mari Turner, who is a state representative in Oklahoma. Mari Turner represents the Oklahoma City area. Mari Turner is Black. She is a Muslim. Mari Turner is Black, Muslim, and non-binary. Oklahoma City is not majority Black. It is not majority Muslim, and most of them don't know what the heck non-binary means. But Mari Turner was very clear about who they were as they were running, and was successfully elected. If Mari Turner can get elected in, by God, Oklahoma City, then anyone can get elected anywhere if they have the right background, the track record, and they can, a narrative that connects to voters.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer. And my second question, I guess, building off, you kind of briefly touched on it in that answer, but my next question is, what role has the Victory Fund and Victory Institute played in your own political career? What are its current goals and accomplishments, and how does the dual structure of the fund and institute enable you to achieve those goals?
That is a really great question. First, Victory turned 30 last year, and it was the first year I ran, it was just getting out of the starting blocks and really had no impact. I was aware of it, but it didn't really have any impact on my race. It endorsed its first candidate in 91, and I was not a viable candidate. I mean, they weren't able to engage in my race, but even had they been, we have a viability standard. We only endorse LGBTQI candidates. It is necessary, but not sufficient. You also have to have some path to victory. So I was aware of it. I was briefly on the board of Victory in the early 90s. And I took the candidate and campaign training, probably in 1994. We still do a very similar version of candidate and campaign training that we've done for nearly 30 years. The basics of the fundamentals of campaigning haven't changed. The tools of campaigning change. You still have to communicate with voters. You still have to craft a message. The tools you use to craft a message, or the tools you use to connect to voters, have changed. You know that when I started campaigning, there was no such thing as a cell phone. Just saying. I've done the training, and then I've now led the organization for the last 4 years, going on, well, I guess, yeah, 4.5 years. Victory did endorse me when I ran and won in 1997 and in my subsequent races. But the way Victory works, Victory Fund is a bundling pack. It was founded by some of the same folks who founded Emily's List, and it's on the same model. And to understand, a bundling pack is an organization that seeks out candidates, compiles information, and then shares that information with donors, and the donors make their own decision as to whether to support candidates. And so in the early days, in 97, when I won my council seat, once a week, every other week, after Victory endorsed me, I would get a FedEx package in the mail with paper checks from donors across the country. They would mail their checks in to Victory, and Victory would, bundle them up and again, bundling pack, and send them to me. Small checks from, $25, $50 from donors around the country. Now, if you wanted to donate to a candidate through Victory, you'd go to the Victory webpage, victoryfund.org, and you'd find the candidate of choice, and you'd click on their link, and electrons would send your money to that candidate. But it's the same process. Victory Fund only endorses openly LGBTQ candidates, and we don't have any policy positions other than the following. They must believe in some right access to abortion, because we believe the right to privacy is fundamentally for LGBTQ people, and that is related to access to abortion. And they must be trans inclusive. Both of those issues, unfortunately, mean that even though we're a bipartisan organization, that it excludes a lot of, there are not a lot of LGBT Republican candidates, but it does exclude some candidates. Now, on the Institute side, that's where we do the training. We do leadership development for our current elected officials. We have an internship program on Capitol Hill, which is really phenomenal. We do international LGBT candidate work. And we offer that to anyone. You must be LGBTQ to access our services, but you don't have to be an endorsable candidate. You can be anywhere on the political spectrum. You just have to be interested in politics and wanting to serve. And if you want a kind of a glimpse of what the state of politics in America is for the LGBTQ community, go to, I've mentioned our Institute website and the fund website, but we also maintain a website called Out for America. And if you do an internet search, outforamerica.org, it's every known current serving LGBT elected official across the country. And you can sort by state, by position, by political affiliation. There are more trans elected officials in America than Republican LGBT elected officials currently serving, FYI. But that's what we do. We are the only national organization that doesn't do any policy work at all. We don't lobby. We don't lobby our elected officials. We only work to help put people in the pipeline. We do people. Our belief is if you put the right people in the right place, they'll do the right things or they'll be accountable to their voters. And that our mission is to put LGBTQI leaders into either elected or appointed office.
Great. Thank you again for that wonderful answer. My final question for you before we hand it off to my peers is, what is the importance of effective communication to your organization's goals, and how do you practice it?
So effective communication is important to success in anything you do, whether it's business, whether it's politics, whether it's being involved in a volunteer organization or your faith institution. Yeah, communication, your relationship depends on communication. And my wife and I have been together 31 years. Communication. But in terms of politics, it is particularly important, and it's particularly, I guess, fraught because and some of it is I'm thinking through the question here. Some of it is the changes in the way we communicate and the rise of social media. When a politician speaks, you are speaking to multiple audiences, and you know that. You're speaking to your constituents, you're speaking to your colleagues in whatever body you serve, you're speaking to the people who work for you, and you may or may not be speaking to strangers out there. And then unfortunately now with social media, you have a whole world of either fans or trolls that you're also speaking to that can begin to amplify in positive and negative ways the message that you speak. So what you say and how you say it has to be something that you put a lot of energy and attention into. At the same time, if you go back to what I said earlier about, if people want you to be authentic, they don't want you to be scripted. It's a tough line to walk.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, I guess I'll open up the floor to any of my peers who have any questions. First hand up I see is Jamil. Go ahead, Jamil, it's yours.
Hi, Mayor Parker. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Jamil. I'm a senior at FIU studying political science and also minoring in international relations. My goals are to pursue a master's degree at FIU as well in cybersecurity and technology policy. And I plan to use that all the way up until law schooling and become an active leader in a political community. As someone who wants to work in campaigns and lead campaigns, how do you find strategies to gather big time donors? I guess another way to word this question too is, did your time in office also help you a lot to garner those relationships that enabled you to find all of these donors for the Victory Fund as well?
Well, yes, clearly the last part of your question. Yeah, I mean, as mayor of Houston, I represented more people than the governors of 15 states. Houston, I mean, the fourth largest city in the United States, I had 2.3 million constituents. It's big league, high, full contact, blood sport, very expensive politics. So I had to learn how to raise money. That said, the kind of people who donate to a mayoral candidate, for example, particularly an incumbent mayoral candidate, tend to be what I would call usual suspects. There are people who do business with the city or the county, or that have a vested interest. It's hard to attract donors from other places. You tend to be fishing in your own pond. The people who contribute to Victory, and we do have some significant donors, are mission driven. And you know, so the tools and are the techniques of how to ask and getting comfortable with that and asking people for money certainly serve me well, but the people who I'm asking are very different. You know, I've been helping train candidates for a very long time, and that is a big part of Victory's mission. But I have done candidate trainings for Emily's List. I've done candidate trainings for Annie's List, which is sort of an analog to Emily's List in Texas. I've done it for the Democratic Party. The number one hard thing for people to do is to ask for money. I'd rather have a root canal every day. Shoot me up and give me the pain. I'd rather do that than do call time. But call time is necessary. A mayoral race in Houston, you can't even suit up and take the field without about $1 million budget. I raised and spent $4 million 3 times in 6 years. That's 12 million. And it was painful. I just get sick to my stomach thinking about it. So why does it cost so much? Well, when a political campaign is a short-term small business. And I talk to people all the time, I'm going to run a grassroots campaign. Okay, are you going to have phones? Are you going to have a piece of paper with your name on it that you've had printed that you hand to somebody? Is there going to be some place that people can gather to volunteer and, on and on and on? It's a short-term small business, and it scales based on the size of a campaign. A small state rep race we have state rep candidates who win on $5,000. Houston is a huge media market, and it's a huge city, and it's just the scale of the campaign is different. But every campaign has to have resources, and that involves at some point a candidate asking a stranger for money. When I first started doing it, when I first started doing it, I still do it the same way. I had cue cards and I practiced, and okay, this sounds really stupid, but I would write my name and the campaign phone number down because my mind might blank out, and I wanted to make sure it was on there, and then this is why I'm running, and I'd write it down, even though I memorized it, but it was in front of me. And if the donor said this, I'd come back with that, and I had it scripted. I did that for every campaign because I never got comfortable with it. But I learned how to do it successfully. But I will also say that every time I moved up in council, controller, and mayor, the person I ended up in a runoff each time, and my opponent outspent me every race. And my average donation was much smaller. That's not unusual for women candidates, I'm just going to say. I learned how to do, Victory still teaches some version of what I would call the house party fundraising technique. It's how people sold Tupperware or Amway or Mary Kay, or I don't know if any of y'all recognize those names. But if you're going to do, people a lot of times, just going to do a big fundraiser. Okay, so you find a venue and you do some catering and you send out, and every candidate wants to do, I'll just send out an e-blast. Well, there's no reason for someone to show up unless they really, really like you, because there's no peer pressure. But if I do something in my home and I invite 20 of my closest friends and I expect them to, and they say they're going to come, it's not about the candidate, it's about me. And we do a lot of, I raised a lot of my money with very intense, small dollar, person-to-person house party fundraisers. Like, so each one designed to raise like $1,000. When you add that up to get to $1 million, that's a lot of small dollar fundraisers. But it does a couple of things. One, it puts the peer pressure in. 25 people at $40 or 40 people at $25. Can keep doing the math. You've invested someone else in your success. You've added the element of peer pressure. And if you get a small donation from somebody, you're going to be going and asking that person again and again. So even if, the goal in fundraising is to ask the right amount from somebody, I'm at a stage and place in my life where, I used to write a $25 check. Now I don't think about anything about writing a $250 check. I'm not going to write a $2,500 check very easily. But someone who researches me and sees what I give to candidates is going to know what to ask for when they get to me. But even if I only write somebody a $25 check, they're going to still come back and ask me for more, and it begins to add up. That was a long answer to your question, but fundraising is so fundamental, and it is so hard for folks, and particularly for women. When I won my mayor's seat, I was and I'm really trying to scramble it, particularly in the runoff. I'm doing what dual dialing. So I had like 2 fundraising people on either, and there's also this idea, so I'm going to hire a fundraiser. That's not how it works. You hire a fundraiser to put a list in front of you, and then you make a phone call. But I would have a person on either side of me making phone calls. As soon as they, trying to get people on the line, they would hand me the phone, and I'd make their pitch while the other person is trying to get the next person on the line, and I'm just going back and forth for hours at a time. It's freaking miserable. That's not the word I was going to use, but it is. Is there another question?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Alexandra, go ahead if you're ready.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alexandra Howard. I'm a freshman here studying political science and hopefully double majoring in journalism in the future. And I found your background very inspiring, especially because you're a woman in politics who's also part of the LGBTQ community. And my question for you is, how has others' perception of you, such as through media representation, shaped you as the LGBTQ woman in politics you are today?
How has other people? So let me say first, I became a lesbian activist when I was in college in the 70s. I'm one of the founders of my universities, and I went to Rice University in Houston. I'm one of the founders of my university's LGBT student organization. There were only a handful of them in the country in the 70s, and we had one. And I literally learned how to do public speaking because after I wouldn't have done it while I was an undergraduate, but we founded the organization immediately after I graduated in 1979. And we created a speakers bureau. We got all the fun, like deviant sociology and criminology. But we went and we asked professors to allow us to come talk to our peers about our experience on campus. And I learned that if I understood the subject, and hello was my life, that I could speak about things. So everything about being openly gay, being a lesbian activist. I attended my first LGBT organizing event in 1975. So I've been an activist for a very long time. It all has contributed to both my life experiences and the skill sets that I brought to politics. I was the first LGBTQ mayor of a major American city, but I was also only the 10th woman in American history to lead a top 10 US city. And that's, it's frustrating and sad at the same time. But when I became mayor of Houston, it was the largest city in America that had ever had a woman mayor. Currently, so I was the first LGBT mayor and the first woman, and the second woman mayor of Houston, but the largest city at that time, the largest city to ever have a woman mayor. Currently, that city is Chicago. And Lori Lightfoot she took both my titles away from me. I love Lori, but she took both my titles away. Chicago is almost the same size as Houston. It's about 100,000 people larger. Largest American city to ever have a lesbian mayor or gay mayor. Largest American city to ever have a woman mayor. People think, oh, New York is such a liberal place. New York has never been led by a woman. Los Angeles, never been led by a woman. Of the now 12 women in American history who have led top 10 cities, and still that number's not going up very fast, 6 were Texas mayors. Houston has had 2 women mayors. Dallas has had 2 women mayors, and San Antonio has had 2 women mayors. Again, New York's never had one, LA's never had one, Chicago's had 2. Why would a place like Texas, which is not a progressive place and going backwards every day, done so well with women in leadership positions? It certainly hasn't done well in terms of, women leading, having higher numbers of women in public office than other places. But women in executive positions, yeah, there was a time when my predecessor, Kathy Whitmire, was mayor of Houston, when all of the major cities in Texas had women mayors. And my theory is it's a combination of sort of chivalry and chauvinism in there. That Texas, that frontier attitude of, we don't care who your people are, we don't care much, we just want to know what you can do. And when you have women who were able to get in and exploit the playing field, I can throw an elbow with the best of them, I can compete just like a male politician can in very similar ways, then Texas has rewarded us for that. And certainly it didn't help that I was openly gay. And I had to admit again, I think that's a lot of the reason I lost my first 2 races. I had to figure out how to own the narrative and get around it. But what I tell people today is that it's not a positive, but it's not a negative. There've been too many out elected officials. There are too many images now in public life of out LGBT folks. I think one of the reasons that with Florida's even the Florida so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill that they're debating down there right now, it's not really aimed at those who are gay and lesbian. It's aimed at the trans community. And part of the reason for that, I believe, is that no one in America can legitimately say they don't know someone who is gay or lesbian. It may not be an intimate personal friend, but it's the person down at the convenience store, or that couple that lives down the street, or it's Ellen DeGeneres on TV, whatever it is. But a lot of folks can still legitimately say they don't know anyone who is trans and don't understand what it means. And as long as you can other somebody, it's easy to make them a target and to use them for political purposes. And which makes it even more important for us to put those of us who are comfortable in our own skin and able to be out there and navigate the world of politics. There are risks, but there are rewards for sure.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question. Kind of got on a roll there.
You did. Thank you.
Angela, if you'd like to go next.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mayor Parker, for being here with us today. And My name is Angela. I am a senior majoring in public policy and administration with future aspirations of entering a combination master's and PhD program at FIU and Africa and African diaspora studies and sociocultural studies. And I want to say congratulations for making ground in the state of Texas during the 90s with your intersectionality. It's not only LGBTQ community, but a female. Like, I'm still blown away by your record during that time in the 90s. And I'm also inspired by the Victory Institute because it's similar to something that I would aspire to do as well for Black females, which is to have a platform to pull them into public policy and service, whether it's through foreign relations, international relations, humanitarian efforts, local public policy, because we're highly underrepresented in public policy and positions right here in the United States, just overall and on all different levels. And also the second piece is to fund those projects and bring in our youth, our female community, our female youth community in as early as possible to get them exposed to policy and, hey, you can be a mayor too. So thank you for your example, because it's something that I can point to just as a female myself for the female community. But I wanted to ask you, what have you seen, other than the changes in social media, over your time in office, your time at Victory Institute up till now? What changes have you seen in the campaign trail when for candidates who are campaigning for office? Do you see it positive changes? Are there negative changes? Is it grittier? Is it completely different than when you were campaigning? And I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that were. And then I have a second question, if you have time, which is if you could explain.
Hold a second.
Oh.
Hold a second question. Let me
Okay.
think, because I wanted. So Victory does the best job of candidate campaign training for those who are LGBTQ. We work closely with groups like Emerge and She Should Run and New American Leaders. New American Leaders is for first generation Americans, and they if we have a candidate that we may send one to their training, and they may send something to ours. There's a lot of groups out there that do things to get people into the political process. If you go to a candidate campaign training, I could go to something that's MAGA oriented, and 90% of it would be the same, because the nuts and bolts of campaigning are different. It's that 10% of, where you, again, how you put yourself into the campaign, how you put your own narrative into it. Those are where the differences are. And women tend to want to be overqualified before they run for things, like, oh, I need to go to a candidate campaign training. And so the short answer is no, you don't. But you need to have done something to learn about campaigning. I volunteered for, 20 years before I was elected to office. I worked for other candidates. I volunteered in campaigns. I knew about campaigning. I also went to the training, because it's different when you're the candidate, but you need to get some experience in campaigning, but there are lots and lots of ways to do that. And what you said about, getting people into the process, not everybody needs to be a candidate. Everybody has to be in the process. Everybody has to care about politics and who's being elected, because it is elected officials at multiple levels who determine what happens with so many of the things that happen in our daily lives. Now, I actually believe that local government is much more impactful in someone's life than what happens at the state or the federal level. You can spend your whole career in Washington talking about things, but if you're a city council member, you're actually having to, it's operational. You're having to do things and make decisions that, every day there's a cadence that you have to keep going. school boards, things like that. Victory helped elect a mosquito control board member in South Florida. Talk about operational and a big deal in South Florida. So every position counts. But as mayor of Houston and as a council member in Houston, mayor and council, we determined the quality of the water that much of the Gulf Coast region drinks, because Houston is the water provider for a huge region. If you care about police issues and policing, I hired and fired the police chief, and with city council signed off on the training protocols and the discipline protocols of my police officers. Everything about your life is touched by politics. And if you don't engage at all, you have made a decision to allow other people to control your life. And so we all have to be involved, and our democracy is stronger when it looks like all of us. One of the things I'm most proud of in the work I've done at Victory, and we have if you go to Victory, this is on the Victory Institute side. If you go to victoryinstitute.org and you look at our reports, we have something, we do demographic data on LGBTQ candidates. LGBTQ candidates are 30% more diverse than the general candidate pool. We are running in record numbers and we look like America. Black gay male candidates are very similar, are approaching population levels of Black men in America. Black women are still much underrepresented, and we need to do things to get more Black women in the process. But some really interesting demographic data from our reports that people need to look at and understand. And I think I've lost your question. Doesn't happen very often, but I think I just did. What was your question?
No, I just what your thoughts were on the politics, I would say, of the campaigning process.
Yeah, what has
got
changed?
better or worse?
Yeah. Thank you. It's like I should have written it down. I'm going to go back first. So I said I started as a lesbian activist in the 70s when I was in college, and there was no internet, there was no social media, there were no cell phones. Every one of us, we were on little islands in the big sea, and we didn't know what was happening on the next island. And there have been LGBT activists for 100 years in America, and there was a vibrant LGBT movement in the 50s and 60s, but we consider that the modern movement started at Stonewall in 1969. And I'm not old enough for Stonewall, but I'm not that far behind. But when you think about it, how you organized at all when the only instrument you had was the US mail and a telephone, and there was no way to know who was LGBT in another city, and the technology, how do you mobilize a protest? It was a phone tree, and it was the isolation, and you're constantly reinventing the wheel. When I moved into formal politics from community organizing, again, I said this earlier, it's all about connecting to voters. So what you do in a campaign hasn't changed. It's just how you do it. Except social media and digital communication communication is still paramount, but it is so different than anything that we experienced in the past. And even at Victory, we're having to change. We're constantly tweaking our candidate campaign training, again, to keep up with the latest digital tools, but also to try to keep up. And this is why polling really sucks. Political polling really sucks right now, because there's no shared set of facts. No one's watching the same news media. and no one, and you can't communicate to all voters. I mean, you used to be able to communicate to all voters, you know, you get them on the phone. We no longer have a landline. My mother has a landline. I mean, and so in my kids, the only way you can get them is on a text. So we are subdividing into smaller and smaller population groups, and the methods of connecting to those smaller population groups are changing on a daily basis. So that is it's really difficult to keep up with, and it is changing politics in really profound ways. So, you know, it's still all about communicating with voters, but how you communicate with them is very, very hard. And you had another question?
You answered it. You answered it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Darius, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Darius Bazemore. I am a MBA major a healthcare MBA major. I'm out in Washington State, so it's a little different for me. We have a question I hope that I can kind of make more concise. I kept making it longer and longer in my head. So my question is that with the LGBTQ community, being a woman, being in Texas, intersectionality is like the bread and butter for everything that you do. Like, you have so many different people who come to you expecting that their view is the primary focus that you should have, that you have to represent them as such a strong, as like the foremost thing that you have to represent, even though you represent the 4th largest city in the nation. I would ask, what is your advice for not alienating your original or your prescribed basis? So not alienating the fact that your base probably was originally women or was originally lesbians, and now that you get to a place of the ability to provide, you know, change and to be able to push forth agendas, there's that desire or entitlement that tends to almost detract away. It seems like when you're watching the likes of anyone in politics, whether it's Barack or Condoleezza Rice or Colin Powell or anyone who has that I'm a woman, I'm a minority, I'm a person of color, they tend to have that almost pullback once they get to a place where they can make change.
You know, it kind of depends. It depends on what you want to accomplish in the position. And I think it's fundamental that you're honest with the voters as you're coming in, to what you're willing to do and not willing to do, and what your positions are on things. It's astounding to me how many people decide to run for office and then figure out what they feel about positions, or what the position is on issues. You know, I have changed my position on some issues over the years, but when I first ran, I mean, I sat down with a group of advisors, and we, you know, created a list. We thought every major issue that was confronting the city, and, you know, and I articulated on paper what my position was, and honed it so that, again, communication. When I was on the campaign trail, oh yeah, I know what, I've thought about this. And I'll just say that part of the reason when I won my first race was because I had an opponent who he was a really nice guy, but I think he legitimately changed his position on something during the course of the campaign. But he had, in writing, responded in one place one way on a hot button issue, and in another place another way. And I just pointed it out, and they eviscerated him. I didn't have to do anything to him. I was clear when I came in, particularly as mayor. Mayor is very different. I mean, I like being a council member, being the elected controller for the city. Houston's the strongest strong mayor city in the United States. It's the closest thing to a benevolent dictatorship you can have in America. It was wonderful being mayor of Houston. Strong mayor cities tend to have an elected treasurer or controller to make sure the mayor doesn't empty the treasury. And controller is a management job. It was fine. I learned a lot, but I loved being mayor, but I was very clear that I was not the lesbian mayor of Houston. I wasn't the woman mayor of Houston. I was the mayor of Houston. And people needed to understand that I wasn't a spokesperson for any one community or another. My job in my mind was to represent all the citizens of Houston. I know when I was running Houston, we elect moderate, business friendly, middle of the road Democrats we have for generations to be mayor. And I was there were three moderate. I was probably the most conservative of the three Democrats who were running, which is a little bit ironic, but I know there was and again, big city, big media market. We had televised debates on 4 different channels. We had 4 different televised debates. And one of the big issues was, would I introduce, I think the question to all of the 3 major candidates was, would you introduce an LGBTQ non-discrimination ordinance upon taking office? And my opponents both said yes. And I said no. And I said, I don't think that's it is important to me personally, but it's not the most important issue facing the city of Houston. And these are the things that I'm going to work on first. And then at the appropriate time, I'll get to that. And I disappointed a lot of people when I said that, but I calmed down a lot of other people when I said that. But the most important thing for me was that I was communicating clearly, who I thought I was, what I was running for, why I needed to be there. And those, you mentioned Barack Obama. Barack Obama, he was who he was. I mean, if you listen to it, I mean, he didn't get in office and become someone else, even though he'd been a community organizer. I was a community organizer. When he was as a candidate, he was very clear who he was as a man, and that he was not going in to be the Black president of the United States. There were times when he was called upon to be, and he stepped up into it. And it's what happens to a lot of, again, intersectional candidates, non-traditional candidates. The community expectations are that you are moving into that position to advocate. And there are times when you need to advocate, but that's, you're elected to serve all of your constituents to the best of your ability. I'll give you an example. While I was mayor, I was very active in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And you're a kind of a rock star if you're one of the top 10 cities, maybe even top 20 cities, but top 10 cities if you're at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And it's for cities over 30,000 in population. I was at one of the U.S. Conference of Mayors meetings, and I'm walking along, and I see there are like 7 gay mayors of different sized cities, and the rest of them were guys. And I see the other 6 guys, and they're standing around talking, and they waved me over, and they said, the U.S. Conference of Mayors is going to take a position on gay marriage before the Supreme Court ruling. And I'm like, cool, that's wonderful to hear. And they're like, no, it's not. All of they have a steering committee of big city mayors, and there's not a single LGBT mayor who's on that steering committee. And I said, hey, that sounds great. It means they get it. I'm sorry, my dog has just gotten excited in the background. Hey, cat. Thank you. And he said, no, this is not a good thing. Think about the U.S. Conference of Mayors if they were taking a position on immigration and not a single Latinx mayor was on the committee, or they were taking whatever. I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And they said, so we volunteered you to be on the steering committee for the equal marriage. And so I'm there with Bloomberg and Rahm Emanuel and Menino in Boston, and we do this big press conference, and there's like a dozen of us, and we're the steering committee. And as mayors, this is important to our cities and to our constituents. we are all united, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors has taken an official position in support of equal marriage. I get home, and 2 weeks later, I get barraged with crazy people saying that I need to step down because I was in violation of my oath of office because the state of Texas has a constitutional amendment prohibiting marriage. And my inbox kept crashing because all of these anti-marriage folks, to the best of my knowledge, in talking to the straight mayors who were on the panel, not one of them got any hate mail at all. Because it was cool because they were showing how progressive they were. It was not cool because I was a shill for my community at that point. That's the way it works. I don't know how we're doing on time. We've gone over. I'm happy to keep going, but I don't want to keep anybody.
Yeah, I was gonna let it up to you. We are at time, but if you have the time to spare us for 1 or 2 more questions, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
If anyone does have questions.
Susanna, go ahead.
Howdy, Mayor Parker. My name is Susanna Barr. I'm a PhD student at FIU. I'm also an Aggie, and my family's from Houston.
I knew it when you said howdy.
That was the point.
I'm an owl, so I got to do it. Yeah.
My grandmother's house was right down the street from Rice, so I've got some old alumni t-shirts. My question for you is maybe either through an example or just in general, how has being a woman been an asset in your position? Like, if there are ways that it has worked for you that you may not have expected at the time. We talk a lot about the negatives, but sometimes, particularly with Texas's weirdness, sometimes being a woman helps.
Yeah, I mentioned it a little earlier, and I didn't really follow up on it. That what I say is kind of weird chauvinism and chivalry that kind of. I know when I was. You've got to be careful how you treat. Still in the South, you have to be careful about how you treat women publicly if you're a man. And I know when I was in '97, I was in a runoff. I was out in a candidate forum in the Kingwood area outside of Houston. If you know where Kingwood is, very, very Republican, very conservative. And there was a mayor's race, and there were 2 at-large races that had runoffs. And so we were out there, and we'd been answering questions in a large auditorium for about an hour. And some guy got up and grabbed the microphone and started screaming at me. And he said something to the effect, Ms. Parker, you've been up there for an hour, going on and on about stuff. You have never once revealed your homosexual agenda for the city of Houston. And it was like the seas parted. I mean, like everybody was like leaning away from him. And it was probably the best thing he could have done for me because, first of all, it gave me an opportunity to say, I've been up here talking about the things that I want to work on and I think are most important for the citizens of Houston. But he was rude to me. He screamed at me in a public place, and everybody was embarrassed by it. And they didn't want to be associated with him. And that is just, that kind of thing. It in person is actually beneficial for one because people respond to it. Now, the downside is that mostly that happens on social media. We have another report. If you go again, Victory, the Ascend Fund gave some money to Victory, a grant to Victory, and we did a survey, and we have it on our victoryinstitute.org website under our reports. And we surveyed more than 200 out lesbian and bisexual and trans women across the country who are holding office. And then we did focus groups and reported, back to the Ascend Fund. And they wanted to know if we faced different challenges than other women who were running. And the answer is no, we all pretty much face the same challenge. What is one of the number one fears that any woman who runs for office has? Violence, physical violence, emotional violence, being attacked on social media. And I'm just going to tell you that it's going to happen. In person, face to face, very rare. But if they can be anonymous and ugly, I mean, the first thing someone, wants to mention is, my weight or my age. I mean, and it's just there. And that is only going to get worse, but the in-person stuff, very, very rare. The other thing, people didn't know, if you're in a negotiation, the one who names a number first is at a disadvantage. The one who, you want to be in your element. And there's an awkwardness, but particularly in the South, do you offer your cheek? Do you offer your hand? And with a woman in an executive position, the guys that would come in to see me, the businessmen that come in to see me, wouldn't know what to do. Like would they go in for a clinch or a handshake? And so I owned those interactions, and there's an advantage to that. There's also some awkwardness every so often, but yeah.
Cool.
And then finally, you get sometimes, again, the place where it's hard is that, yes, women are judged about being too smiley. And I mean, there's lots of data on this, too smiley. You're trying to find the sweet spot between, are you a bitch or are you like too smiley, and the tone of voice. It used to make me crazy. The way Hillary Clinton would get criticized about, she was someplace and that she was trying to project her voice to the back of the room, and she a bunch of stories about her screaming at the audience. I want you to think in your mind, picture your own internal picture of Bernie Sanders with his hair standing on end, waving his arms like a windmill, throttling his lectern and shaking it. And okay, and that's cool, but Hillary trying to raise her voice, that happens to women, and that is it is a fact, and it's a negative. When I was campaigning for mayor, I put myself back through my own personal campaign boot camp. And one of the things I did was I worked with a theatrical producer or director, rather, and in a big empty room, sitting on my hands. I'm going to sit on my hands now, and projecting my voice to the back of the room and doing my stump speech without raising my voice and sounding like I was yelling. Now, I used to be a softball coach too, so that helps. But
Yeah.
Women. So there are positives and negatives, and you just have to work around them. That was an interesting question.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and if you have time for one more question, Ashley, feel free.
Hi, my name's Ashley De Oliveira. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to ask, and it was kind of connects to what you were just talking about, but you said you worked for oil in Texas prior to some of your later campaign stuff. And I just kind of wanted to ask, how did you handle the sort of boys club that you must have been had to work your way into as far as that goes? And then as far as confrontation in business with men, how did you handle that? And did you find that you ever had to, well, I'm sure you did, but did you find that you had to overcompensate to match the tone that men are giving you? And then kind of how did you balance that with, like you said, not being, I'm a bitch, but you're being, you're not going to push me around and I'm a strong person, and kind of walking that line?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to say I sort of avoided it. So I spent 20 years working in the oil and gas industry. 18 years I worked for conservative Republican oil man Robert Mosbacher, who was a good friend of the Bush family and served as U.S. Commerce Secretary in Bush 41. So I had a 20-year career in the oil industry. I was full-time, 18 years, public office. And now I've been out of office 7 years. I'm sort of figuring out what my third career is. But in the oil industry, one, I was sheltered somewhat because I was in a privately held oil firm, not one of the big companies. But it was another long story, which I'm not going to go into, but I accidentally rode the tech wave in the oil industry. I came into the industry between the mainframe computer era and the desktop computer era. And by a set of circumstances, I learned how to use a desktop computer, and I was hired at Mossbacher. That was basically their IT department. And like as I said, accidentally rode the tech wave. So I was in an door shut, and I had information, and I knew things that no one else in the company did. And so in the 80s, when the oil industry was devastated and people were losing their jobs, I had some job security, and I really didn't have to deal with the BS and the very male dominated industry. So when I say I sidestepped it, I really did. And oil, politics, both very male dominated. And the same technique kind of served me in politics, and that is that I was a master of the information, master of the data, master of the process. And no one else could touch me. In the industry, it was because I knew how to use it. I knew how to specialized petroleum engineering software. And it had access. No one barely even knew how to turn a computer on. I know it doesn't sound like it sounds strange today, but no one even knew how to turn a computer on, and no one had one, but I did. And so I had power. And when I went into campaigning, it was the same thing. No one could master me or match me in knowing about the ins and outs of whatever the issue was that we were debating. I overtrained. I overcompensated. If they worked this hard, I worked this hard. Screening with Houston Chronicle in '97. Houston Chronicle, they do cattle call screenings where they line up all the candidates for a race, and the editorial board's on the other side of the table, and you all get asked the same question, and you all have to, you hear each other's answers. And I prepped obviously for the answer or for the questions, made notes during the meeting of who asked which editorial board member asked which questions, wrote them a thank you note afterwards, referenced the question they'd asked, and provided more information. I overkilled everything. I worked way too hard. But that's how I did it. The answer to your question, I overcompensated. And unfortunately, I think that particularly in women in executive positions in politics, not so much as a council member, but as a mayor or a governor, you have to do it.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Parker. Thank you, everybody. Those were all incredible questions. Mayor Parker, incredible answers. I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you for your time coming to speak with us. Thank you for going over your time coming to speak with us. Yeah, we all really
please some of you check out my, the website, victoryfund.org, victoryinstitute.org, outforamerica.org, and look at some of the reports. We have some interesting information on candidates out there. And thank you. And Skylar, thank you for moderating.
Of course.
And I'll give the program thank you to Mayor Parker. We really appreciate your time, and as Skylar said, for staying a little bit extra with us today. I think this was super informative, and I learned a lot. I appreciate everything that you shared. Skylar, thank you for moderating. You did a fantastic job. So I think if you want to use your reaction buttons and give a little round of applause for our moderator and of course for our guest. And yeah, we thank you so much. And I think if the group wants to stay on for just a few minutes, then